Hi, Booktube. Welcome to a fiction review. We are out of order. We are well out of order, but it is a special occasion. Yes, we should be doing a non-fiction review today. However, it is the 5th birthday of a well-known and well-loved Booktube channel, so I felt it was better today to review a book that I bought purely because it was recommended by that Booktube creator. Happy birthday! Happy Booktube birthday to Gareth at Book Songs and Other Magic. His channel is 5 years old this month, and today he's having a live event to celebrate. And normally, if someone I know is having a significant birthday, I go into baking mode, right? I like to make cake. But I couldn't work out how was I going to get a cake down to Portsmouth where Gareth lives and still have it look like a cake. That didn't seem, I couldn't think of a way. So I was casting around, what else can I do to celebrate, to say thank you for all the videos I've watched and I've enjoyed, and I thought what better way than to read a book that I bought because Gareth recommended it. So today we are reviewing The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. And I'm going to read through my lovely stats slide. Year it was published was 1955. It's only 200 pages long. It's a very short novel. And because it is now a classic of science fiction and there have been so many reprints, it's very, very easy to get an inexpensive copy online. You can see the Kindle prices, both in the UK and the US, are very good right now. But also you can get some extremely inexpensive paperback copies. You can see down there that I've read this in honor of the 5th birthday of Gareth's channel, Books, Songs, and Other Magic. There will, of course, be a link to his channel and a link to his birthday announcement video because I'm really pleased that he's reached this milestone. He's produced so much good content. But back to John Wyndham. Now, he described his own writing as logical fantasy. I've listed it here as science fiction, but the truth is he disliked that term strongly. He felt that the term science fiction meant that people associated the novels with some of the black and white B movies that had come out in the 50s that were sort of had lots of monsters and people screaming and so on. He didn't like those movies, so he didn't like them associated with his writing. He felt that it meant that no person could write a speculative piece of fiction without it being considered a poor quality piece of fiction before people had even read it. That is, it got prejudged. And I do think there is something to that view with science fiction. I think there is really good writing out there, but it gets prejudged just because it got labeled science fiction. And particularly this cover art. Can I talk about the cover art of the Penguin copy that I read? This creature that appears on the cover, this rather intimidating creature, simply has nothing to do with the story at all. I figure there must have been a mix-up in the Penguin art department. Somebody got the illustration out for a completely different book. Don't ask me which one. Of course, once the copies ran, it was too late to stop things. I can just imagine somebody got a real telling off afterwards. It's like, what were you thinking? Oh, anyway. But I found a better description of a summary of this book, if you like, that's really useful in relation to The Chrysalids. It was written by Amanda Rees, who is a historian of science, and she's also senior lecturer in sociology at the University of York. I'll put a link to her book that I'm quoting from, and in my description box, you'll also see a link to the article on JSTOR that I'm quoting from now. But this is what she says. John Wyndham's post-war novels represent a sustained attempt to analyze the relationship between knowledge, expertise, and society. Wyndham held vigorous opinions on the critical role that science fiction could play in modernity, even as his novels dissected the ultimate unsustainability of industrial urban democracies. He believed that it was the role of the science fiction writer to show that the pace and the path of scientific and technological developments were not predetermined, but potentially subject to collective decision-making regarding the human future. I think that's a brilliant summing up of all his books, but that definition that he is saying, you know what, where we go in the future, there won't be a definite way forward. A lot will depend on human collective decision-making. I think that really does sum up The Chrysalids. What do we know about the author? John Wyndham Parks Lucas Benyon Harris, yes, was born in 1903, a time when middle-class parents sometimes did give their children an awful lot of names. He was born in the village of Dorridge. Dorridge is now actually more like a suburb of the city of Solihull in the West Midlands, very close to Elliot country, by the way. Now, when John was 8 years old, his parents separated, and his father, George Harris, was a barrister, and he attempted to sue his wife's family for the custody, control, and society of his wife and his sons. In other words, he tried to use the law to force his wife to unseparate with him, if you will. It was an unusual, very high-profile court case. George Harris lost. That's probably for the best, I think. But it did mean that John and his brother Vivian were estranged from their father for the rest of their life. They also had to move around a great deal, perhaps because of money or perhaps to keep away from their father. And so John attended several different schools before he was 18. He didn't go on to take any higher education. His first novel in 1935 was The Secret People. I'll link to his Wikipedia page because most science fiction fans know several of his novels, but if you don't, there's a bibliography down at the end. And he died in 1969. Let's go on and talk about the book itself, its setting. Now, in science fiction, it's wonderful because everything is open to you, right? All of time and space is available for you to use, and where your imagination goes, that's the only boundary and limit. So often, at least in the little science fiction I've read, and it has been very little, the opening of the book is an attempt by various means for the writer to help you as a reader to sort of orient yourself, figure out where are you? What time is it, if there's a time that can be figured out? The first place names that are mentioned in the Chrysalids, I didn't recognize. They were things like Waknuk and Rigo and Kentak. But the sounds, they were firing off some brain synapses. Waknuk especially, they reminded me of anglicized versions of Inuit words. And sure enough, on page 39, the narrator then identified the larger area that they were living on as Labrador. And I thought, now I have a pin pointed down on my mental map. And a little bit later, the narrator also said that there was a nearby island called Newf, N-E-W-F. And then I knew, we're on the furthest east coast of Canada in the province of Newfoundland, which also has an island called Labrador. Now, of course, the characters have switched it round and said the mainland is Labrador and the island is Newf. But I thought that made sense, given the disastrous catastrophe, whatever it is, that the characters' ancestors had gone through, which preceded them. It seemed to make sense that there would be some misremembering of what places were actually called. In terms of time, we're in the future, we're just not sure where. There has been an event called the Tribulation, according to the narrator of the novel. And we are far enough into the future for there to be no one alive who remembers the world before this cataclysmic event. And that event has created great changes over the Earth's surface. It means that a lot of parts of the planet that we know are habitable now are no longer so. And also, there's been some kind of destabilization in the structure of animal and plant DNA. And so the animal and plant forms that can be seen, well, they look like evolution on fast forward, if you like. And the novel is focusing on how do the surviving humans, how do they react to this change? How do they cope with the fact that things are changing so much around them? The narrative of the novel is first person, and our narrator is a child, which is fantastic. I think in science fiction, a child narrator is wonderful because they are new to the world as well. And so as they figure out how to orient themselves, what are they part of, what should they do, you are learning all the time as well. So we are with David, the son of Joseph, the son of Elias. And if that is starting to remind people of biblical genealogies, well, I think that's deliberate, because this group of people, the community that David lives in, they have developed a coping mechanism, and it's become a profession of faith. And they believe strongly that they are preserving something precious that would otherwise be lost. Regarding the rest of the characters, there are about 15 named characters in the book. And yes, there's a much larger cast of anonymous extras. The comforting thing about the narration is that you meet these characters very slowly. So the number goes from 1 to 2 to 3 over several pages. It takes you really, you get to the end of the book when you meet most of the named characters all at once. So it's a nice gradual progression. You don't have to meet all these people at once and try to remember names. It's good like that. The geography of the book is divided into 3 parts. There are places that support life better, like Labrador, that area. Then there are places which are believed to no longer be able to support life at all. They're called the Badlands. And then there's a sort of an in-between area, which gets called the Fringes. And David is taught to regard the world as a very limited place. And there are places on this version of Earth where nobody has been to them for so long, nobody has been able to travel there, that they're no longer thought to exist or to have any inhabitants. Regarding representation, if the characters in this novel are supposed to be North Americans who've survived a catastrophe, we should expect to see some diversity. Now, it's hard to be sure whether there is or isn't. Not many characters are described, for example, by their skin color. I can't think of one. They all have English names, mainly biblical names, but that doesn't really tell us much because this community's strange mythology, which draws heavily from the Bible, it's such that you'd expect them to give their children biblical names. It doesn't really say who they are in terms of racial or ethnic background. The storyline does address diversity, however, and I think Wyndham's logical fantasy could be used as an allegorical book to discuss issues of diversity and human resistance to diversity. Problematic content. I have to say that I don't think there is any problematic content in this novel. There is a gathering sense of peril, of course, as the book progresses, but the thing about the acts of violence that are in the Chrysalids, and there are some, is they're mainly recounted or retold rather than witnessed. And even those few that you do witness, the writing doesn't dwell on the experience too much. There's no swearing. There are moments that are sexually suggested, but there are no sex scenes. And I wonder if this is why the science fiction writer Brian Aldiss often referred to John Wyndham's novels as cozy catastrophes. And it's true, I felt less uncomfortable reading the Chrysalids than I have reading other works of science fiction. And I think the uncomfortableness is a good thing in science fiction. I think it's needed because you are exploring possibilities that don't exist right now. And it should cause you some discomfort. You should get your imagination stretched. You should get your concept of what is normal challenged a little bit. I think that makes good science fiction. And in the hands of a different author, yeah, this story could have had more complex characters, more nuanced characters, and a slower pace to give you a grainier sense of realism. Wyndham's book, I would say, feels more like the weight of a folk tale or a fable, but very good for beginning science fiction readers. And also the ending is hopeful. And maybe that's the real reason that Aldiss, called it a bit cozy. Perhaps that's what he really objected to. And that's the review done. Thank you very much, Gareth, for recommending that book. It won't be the last book that you recommend and I buy or borrow as a result. In fact, I think I have my copy of Marina Warner. I hate to remind you of that. I don't care whether you do the bi-monthly Belief and Behavior book club or not. I bought the book anyway. I'm going to read it. So I'll give you credit when I finally do a review on that, a nonfiction review, which is what I've got to go and record next. Right, everybody else, have a fantastic June. I hope whatever reading plans you've set down for yourself, you're able to meet them with ease. Okay, see you again in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.